Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DMV CDL Audio Edition. Section 11. Section 11 is all about pre-trip inspection, one of the hardest parts that pass during the test. The best way to learn is to listen. Here we go, Section 11, Vehicle Inspection Test. All vehicles. The vehicle inspection test is a skills test to see if the customer identifies which features and equipment on the test vehicle should be inspected before operating the vehicle. The entire vehicle inspection test must be conducted in English language as of Code CFR Title 49, 391.11b. If you communicate in a language other than English or fail to comprehend instructions given to you in English during the skills test, you will receive a verbal warning for the first two offenses committed in the same test date. Upon the third offense committed on the same test date, the test will end as an automatic failure. A vehicle inspection should be done the same way each time, so you will learn all the steps and be less likely to forget something during the test. Vehicle inspection tests are conducted to ensure that a vehicle is safe to operate. During the vehicle inspection test, you will be expected to explain or show your knowledge of the vehicle inspection process. During the vehicle inspection test, you must show that the vehicle is safe to drive. You will have to walk around the vehicle and point out or touch each item and explain to the examiner what you are checking and why. You will not have to crawl under the hood or under the vehicle. The brake lights, emergency flashers, turn signals, and horn must be checked. If any of these items do not work, the skills and road portion of the test will be postponed. You may use the guide shown on the last page of this section when taking your vehicle inspection test. You cannot write any instructions or notes on the vehicle inspection guide. If you do not pass the vehicle inspection test, the other tests will be postponed. And remember, you are allowed a total of 3 attempts to pass the vehicle inspection, basic control skills, and road test. Internal inspection. Now this is for all vehicles. The internal inspection. Study the following vehicle parts for the types of vehicle you will be using during your CDL skills test. You should be able to identify each part of it and tell the examiner what you are looking for or inspecting. As you approach the vehicle, notice its general condition. Look for damage or if the vehicle is leaning to one side. Look under the vehicle for fresh oil, coolant, grease, or fuel leaks. Check the area around the vehicle for hazards to vehicle movements such as people, other vehicles, objects, low-hanging wires or limbs, etc. Check that the parking brakes are set and or wheels are chocked. You may have to raise the hood or open the engine compartment door, and when you do, check for the following. Check the engine compartment when the engine is off for leaks and hoses. Look for puddles on the ground. Look for dripping fluids underside of the engine and transmission. Inspect the hoses for condition and for leaks. The water pump. Identify the water pump. Identify that the water pump is mounted securely and not leaking. The alternator. Identify the alternator. Check that the alternator is securely mounted and all wires are securely fastened. Air compressor. Identify the air compressor. Point at the air compressor and say, "This is the air compressor." Check that the air compressor is securely mounted and not leaking. Next is your oil level. Indicate where the dipstick is located. Point at it and say, "Here's where the dipstick is located." See that the oil level is within safe operating range. The level must be above the refill mark. Coolant level. Inspect the reservoir sight glass, or, if the engine is not hot, remove the radiator cap and check for visible coolant level. Power steering fluid. Identify where the power steering fluid dipstick is located. Check for an adequate power steering fluid level. The level must be above the refill mark. Windshield washer fluid level. Check the fluid level and that the cap is secure. Engine compartment belts. Check that the following belts are snug, which is 3/4 of an inch play at the center of the belt. Check for cracks or frays. power steering belt, water pump belt, alternator belt, and the air compressor belt. Note: if any of the components listed above are not belt-driven, you must tell the examiner which components are not belt-driven. You must make sure the components are operating properly, not damaged or leaking, and mounted securely. Safe start. Make sure the parking brake is set. Depress the clutch. Place the gear shift lever in neutral, or park in an automatic transmission. Start the engine, then release the clutch slowly. Cab check. Engine start. Okay, cab check. The oil pressure gauge. Make sure the oil pressure gauge is working. Check that the pressure gauge shows increasing or normal oil pressure, or that the warning light goes off. If equipped, the oil temperature gauge should begin a gradual rise to the normal operating range. And the temperature gauge. Make sure the temperature gauge is working. The temperature gauge should begin to climb to the normal operating range of the temperature, and the light should be off. Air gauge. Make sure the air gauge is properly working. Build the air pressure to the governor cutout, which is roughly 120 to 140 psi. Now check your ammeter or voltmeter. Check that the gauges show that the alternator and/or generator is charging and that the warning lights are off. Mirrors and windshield. The mirrors should be clean and adjusted properly from the inside. The windshield should be clean with no illegal stickers, no obstructions, or damage to the glass. Emergency equipment. Check for spare electrical fuses. Check for 3 red reflective triangles, 6 fuses, or 3 liquid burning flares. Check for a properly charged and rated fire extinguisher. Note: if the vehicle is not equipped with electrical fuses, you must mention this to the examiner. Check optional emergency equipment like tire chains. Tire changing equipment. List of emergency phone numbers. Accident reporting kit. Wipers and washers. Check that the wiper arms and blades are secure, not damaged, and operating smoothly. If equipped, the windshield washer must operate correctly. Lights, reflectors, reflector tape condition. Sides and rear. Test that the dash indicators work when the corresponding lights are turned on. Left turn signal, right turn signal, 4-way flashers, high beam, ABS indicator. Check that all the external lights and the reflective equipment are clean and functional. The light and reflectors check, which include the clearance light, which is red on the rear, amber everywhere else. Check the headlights, high and low beams. Check the tail lights, the backing lights, the turn signals, the 4-way emergency flashers, the brake lights. Red reflectors on the rear and amber reflectors everywhere else. Reflector tape condition. Check the license plate light. Note: check of the brake, turn signal, and 4-way emergency flasher functions. They must be done separately. Your horn. Check that the air and/or electric horns are working. Heater and defroster. Test that the heater and the defroster work. Parking brake check. Now fasten your seatbelt. With the parking brake engaged, check that the parking brake will hold the vehicle if gently trying to pull forward with the parking brake on. With the parking brake released and the trailer parking brake engaged, check that the trailer parking brake will hold the vehicle by gently trying to pull forward with the trailer parking brake on. Hydraulic brake check. Pump the brake pedal 3 times and then hold it down for 5 seconds. The brake pedal should not move during the 5 seconds. If equipped with a hydraulic brake reservoir system, with the key off, depress the brake pedal and listen for the sound of the reservoir system electronic motor. Now if equipped with a hydro boost brake system, release the parking brake and with the engine off, depress and release the brake pedal several times to deplete all hydraulic pressure. Depress and hold the brake pedal with light pressure, and then start the engine and run it at an idle speed. If the hydro boost is operating, the pedal will yield slightly to foot pressure and then hold. Less pressure is required to hold the pedal at this position. Check if the warning buzzer light is off. The air brake check. Now refer to Section 5 in the in-cab air brake check. For DMV inspection testing, all items marked with an asterisk are required during the vehicle inspection test. These items must be demonstrated and the parameters verbalized to receive credit. Failure to perform these air brake tests correctly will result in an automatic failure for the entire vehicle inspection portion of this test. Service brake check. You will be required to check the application of air or hydraulic service brakes. This procedure is designed to determine that the brakes are working correctly and that the vehicle does not pull to one side or the other. Now pull forward at 5 miles per hour. Apply the service brake and stop. Check to see that the vehicle does not pull to either side and that it stops when the brake is applied. Safety belt. Check that the safety belt is securely mounted. Adjust, latch properly, and is not ripped or frayed. External inspection. The external inspection is for all vehicles. Let's start with the steering. You check steering boxes and hoses. Check that the steering box is securely mounted and not leaking. Look for any missing nuts, bolts, or cotter keys. Check for power steering fluid leaks or damage to the power steering hoses. And the steering linkage. See that the connecting links, arms, and rods from the steer box to the wheel are not worn or cracked. Check that the joints and sockets are not worn or loose and that there is no missing nuts, bolts, or cotter keys. And next is the suspension. Springs, air, torque. Look for missing, shifted, cracked, or broken leaf springs. If a quarter or more are missing or broken, it would put the vehicle out of service. Look for broken or distorted coil springs. If vehicle is equipped with torsion bars, torque arms, or other types of suspension components, check that they are not damaged and are mounted securely. Air ride suspension should be checked for damage and leaks. Mounts. Look for cracked or broken spring hangers, missing or damaged bushings, and broken, loose, or missing bolts, U-bolts, or other axle mounting parts. The mounts should be checked at each point where they are secured to the vehicle frame and axles. Shock absorbers. See that shock absorbers are secure and there are no leaks. Note: be prepared to perform the same suspension components inspection on every axle, power unit, and trailer if equipped. Brakes. The slack adjusters and push rods. Check that the slack adjuster is securely mounted. Look for broken, loose, or missing parts. For manual slack adjusters, the brake push rod should not move more than 1 inch with the brakes released, and when pulled by hand, they should not move more than 1 inch. Brake chambers. See that the brake chambers are not leaking, cracked, or dented, and are mounted securely. See that there are no loose or missing clamps. Brake hoses and lines. Check that the hoses or lines can supply air or hydraulic fluid to the brakes. Check for cracked, worn, or frayed hoses, and that all couplings and fittings are secured and not leaking. Drum brakes. Check for cracks, dents, or holes. Also check for loose or missing bolts. Check for contaminants such as debris or oil or grease. And the brake linings. Brake linings, where visible, should not be worn dangerously thin. On some brake drums, there are openings where the brake linings can be seen from outside the drum. For this type of drum, check that a visible amount of brake lining is showing. Note: be prepared to perform the same test for all brake components inspection on every axle. Wheels. Rims. Check for damaged or bent rims. Rims cannot have welding repairs. Check that there are no rust trails that would indicate the wheel is loose. Tires. The following items must be inspected on every tire. The tread depth. Check for the minimum tread depth of 4 30-seconds on steering axle tires and 2 30-seconds on all other tires. Tire condition. Check that the tread is evenly worn and look for cuts or other damage to tread or sidewalls. Also, make sure that the valve caps and stems are not missing, broken, or damaged. Tires are the same type, not mixed radials and bias. Front tires for buses cannot be recapped, retreaded, or regrooved. Tire inflation. Check for proper inflation by using a tire gauge. You will not get credit if you simply kick the tires or strike the tires with a mallet or other small device to check for proper inflation. Hub oil or axle seals. See that the hub oil, grease, and axle seals are not leaking, and if the wheel has a sight glass, that the oil level is adequate, and the lug nuts. Check that all lug nuts are present, free of cracks and distortions, and show no signs of looseness such as rust trails or shiny threads. Make sure all bolt holes are not cracked or distorted. Spacers or bud spacing. If equipped, check that the spacers are not bent, damaged, or rusted through. Spacers should be evenly centered with the dual wheels and tires evenly separated. No debris is between the dual tires. Note: be prepared to perform the same wheel inspection on every axle. We will stop here and continue in the next video on 11.3.5, side of the vehicle.